The West is closing its doors to Indian students. Countries like Canada, Australia, the United Kingdom, and New Zealand have welcomed hundreds of thousands of Indian students for years. But over just the last couple of years, each of these countries has enacted strong restrictions on international students. From rising housing costs to the fears of losing jobs, these countries are facing major social and economic problems. But many of them are blaming international students, especially from countries like India, for causing these issues. Thousands of Indian students are now facing shattered dreams, broken promises, and deportation from countries they had chosen to make their homes. On this episode of Threadbare, we ask why Western countries are making it harder for Indian students to fulfill their dreams of a foreign education. We also look at why these countries are blaming international students for their social and economic woes. Let's start at the beginning. 20 years ago, Western countries like Canada and Australia were desperate for international students. The big reason for this was economic competition. Many Western countries like Canada and Australia were facing shortages of highly skilled and trained workers. As such, they looked abroad to find talented individuals who could migrate to their countries and help grow their economies. That led to a focus on bringing more international students to study in the Western world. The theory was that the best among them would stay and work in the country in which they studied, bringing valuable new skills to Western economies. In addition, international students would provide a huge boost to the local economy because they would spend money on goods and services over the years that they were studying in a particular foreign country. For these reasons, Western nations like Australia, Canada, the United Kingdom, and New Zealand began pitching themselves as open, welcoming study destinations for international students. And a big target of that pitch was Indian students. It worked. And over the last 20 years, the number of Indian students studying abroad has skyrocketed. In 2023, just 4 countries, America, Canada, the UK, and Australia, hosted around 850,000 Indian students. And let's be clear, these countries have benefited a great deal from having Indian students living there. Canada's government recently estimated that international students bring over $16 billion into the country's economy. Australia's higher education sector has become the country's 4th largest export. Talent from India and other countries has helped grow these economies, which are increasingly starved of young workers. Now, these students and their families take on massive financial burdens to afford the costs of studying abroad. Their hope is that studying abroad will open up job opportunities and the chance to live and work abroad. But increasingly, this hope has been shattered. Large amounts of immigration into Western societies over the last few years has triggered backlash against foreign immigrants and against international students in particular. These students are now being blamed for rising housing costs, breaking national healthcare systems, and taking jobs from native workers. Ignoring the massive benefits they have gotten from international students, governments have announced sweeping plans to restrict international students. Australia and Canada have just announced that they will reduce the number of international students they will accept in a year. The United Kingdom has made it much harder for students to bring along family members and dependents. And all of these countries, UK, Australia, Canada, Germany, and New Zealand, have all hiked the financial costs of applying to universities in an attempt to dissuade Indian and other international students from applying. Also, many of these countries are backtracking on allowing Indians to work in their countries after graduation. The United Kingdom has announced plans to review its graduate work visa program, which allows students to work in the UK for some years after graduation. Canada has also announced changes to its postgraduate work permit scheme, as well as other policies that could lead to thousands of Indian students losing their right to stay on in Canada. These Indian students now feel betrayed by Western governments for these changing policies. These governments say that their moves are simply aimed at reducing immigration from those who want a student visa as a pathway to working and living in a foreign country. Western governments say that these moves are simply aimed at reducing immigration from those who don't really want to study. They want to restrict immigration from people who see a student visa as a pathway to working and living in a foreign country, rather than just studying. But frankly, this is a ridiculous argument. After all, the chance to live and work abroad after finishing a foreign degree is a big part of the reason why so many Indian students take big financial risks to study in the Western world. Western governments knew that and encouraged these dreams. In addition, these governments have also wrongly blamed international students for social problems like rising housing costs. For example, Canadian cities like Toronto have seen massive increases in rent prices over the last few years. Housing prices have become a massive issue, so much so that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's government has been taking a beating in opinion polls about this. But Canada's government has tried to blame international students for this crisis and believes that cutting student numbers will improve the situation. But many have pushed back against this narrative. Research, including by the University of Waterloo, says that international students are being made scapegoats. They say that in case of Canadian cities, years of restricting zoning and local laws have made it more and more difficult to build housing in sufficient numbers for a growing population. And that alone, not international student numbers, are responsible for high housing prices. But this narrative coming directly from Western governments has made students feel betrayed. I spent 6 years taking risks to come to Canada. I studied, worked, paid taxes, and earned enough comprehensive ranking system points. But the government has taken advantage of us, said Mehakdeep Singh, a student now facing deportation. This is a story that has been replicated across Western countries. The United Kingdom, New Zealand, Australia, and Canada all brought in large numbers of Indian students, took their money, and sold them the possibility of an attractive future. And now, when it's no longer convenient for them, they've chosen to shut their doors and leave Indian students to their fate. The irony of this is that it's likely to be Western countries that are most hit by this decision. Visa applications to Western countries from Indian students have dropped by about 20 to 30% in the first quarter of 2024. A number of top Western universities are warning their governments that fewer Indian and international students will lead to losses of millions of dollars and thousands of jobs for their citizens. Restrictive visa and immigration rules for Indian students will mean that these talented individuals will simply move on to other competitors. Countries like Taiwan, Israel, and South Korea are already getting more interest from Indian students as alternatives to studying in the Western world. In addition, fewer international students will also mean shortages in key industries that rely on flexible, low-wage workers, for example, in food delivery or in restaurants. To sum up, Western countries attracted millions of Indian students to their shores with a simple promise: come here, study, work hard, and get the chance to contribute to our country. After years of benefiting from this deal, the West is now backtracking on its promises. But the price of these policies will be borne by Indian students and eventually by the Western world itself. Thank you for watching Threadbare with me, Shashank Patu. Please do like and subscribe for more such content on India Today Global.